Remember the flavor that tickled your tongue to the point of laughter and made your friends look at you with admiration? That lollipop that started out as a regular candy and ended up as a real fizzy volcano? Or that gum that was chewed by the whole school? A piece from one brick for everyone? The candy of the 80s wasn't just a flavor. They were an event, a ritual, a secret language of children that only those who stood at the candy machines or hid a pink wrapper in their backpack knew. There were gummies with secrets, candy bars, exploding caramels, and drinks that fizzed in the glass like a magical concoction. Each had a soul, each had a character, and many of them are gone, but the memory of them is not. Today we return to those flavors that can't be confused with anything, to those moments when even a simple candy could be the beginning of a real adventure. Astro Pops. The three-colored Astro Pops lollipops look like real rockets, as if they had escaped from a comic book about space adventures. Their pointy end was pointing downwards, which shocked adults but mesmerized children. The lollipop was sold in a transparent film, twisted like a tube of toothpaste, which had to be unwrapped as if revealing a secret. Inside were three colors: bright red, sunny yellow, and lime green, lined up in layers like an alien signal. The flavor was bright, acidic, and long, like waiting for a shuttle launch. Astro Pops were so hard you couldn't bite them. Only lick them, slowly with care. One lollipop could last all day. It started at recess, continued on the bus, and ended at home in front of the TV. When the candy was held by a plastic stick, it resembled a microphone from a space show. Some tried to crack it on the corner of the desk, often missing a front tooth. Parents warned, "It's too sharp, you'll hurt yourself." But that's what made Astro Pops special. They were compared to a real weapon, a lollipop that could be held like a magic staff. Sometimes there were tiny air bubbles hidden inside, and when the candy was shined in the sun, it glowed as if made of liquid glass. Astro Pops were carried in jacket pockets, and after a couple hours, it would get sticky, but no one was upset. It was a ritual. The packaging rustled with a special tinkling sound that couldn't be confused with other sweets. In kiosks, they stood in glass jars like a collection of alien crystals. They were bought for a reason. They were prepared for them. They searched for the most symmetrical one, with an even border between colors. It was customary to start from the bottom layer, red, and gradually go up. Sometimes an Astro Pop would break in two, and it was an occasion to share with a friend, which made the moment especially precious. Even when the tongue was already sore from the acid, the hand continued to hold the stick until the end. Some kids collected plastic bases as if they were fragments of a spaceship. The TV commercials promised that the candy would blow your mouth off, and to be honest, it did blow up the taste buds. The appearance of Astro Pops in a backpack was admired throughout the company. They were the currency of change. They were associated with comic books, aliens, Star Wars movies, and dreams of intergalactic vacations. The disappearance of this candy left a hole, not only in flavor, but in the cosmic aesthetic of the candy. Today it is remembered as something impossible, too bright, too hard, too bold, and therefore perfectly in tune with the spirit of the 80s. Reed's Candy Rolls. Reed's Candy Rolls look like something out of my mom's purse. Austere, neat, understated, yet tantalizing. The wrapper was thick, matte, with gold or silver stripes, depending on the flavor, and seemed like something apothecary, almost medical. Each candy was a neat circle, heavy, smooth, like a miniature stone made of candy amber. In the package, 8 caramels curled up in a tight cylinder like ancient coins. They didn't scream colors or characters like most candy from the 80s. Instead, there was a certain adult seriousness to them. The menthol flavor was like a cool breeze on a cloudy morning. Not sweet, but invigorating. The ginger candy burned gently, like tea drunk too quickly. The cinnamon left behind a spicy trail that lingered in the mouth even after lunch. They were often taken by parents and then sneaked out by children, as if they were part of something important. Reeds did not stick to the teeth, did not leave shiny traces, but they dissolved slowly, like patience. These candies were in glove boxes of cars, in a drawer in the kitchen, in bags next to the powder room. as part of the adult routine. At recess, they seemed odd. Not brightly colored, not acidic, no liquid filling, but that's what made them appealing. Someone would say, "You, it's like a cough," but kept sucking on them without giving them back. Reeds were not chewed, not bitten, they were respected. The flavor was reminiscent of grandma's tea or the first sips of coffee. Not immediately pleasant, but with a tinge of trust. They weren't sold at the supermarket checkout. You had to go to a pharmacy or specialty shop for them. When one candy fell out of its wrapper, it tapped quietly on the floor, and the sound was almost sacred. Some rolled the wrapper back up like a scroll and put it in their pocket so they wouldn't throw it away. There was something almost Japanese about it. They didn't need advertising. They just were. Their flavor didn't change over the years. It was as eternal as vinyl. Reeds were taken with you on the road, to the movies, on a date, not to breathe gum, but something more refined. These candies accompanied conversations about the weather, exams, summer plans. They weren't a favorite, but somehow they were always there. Each year they became more and more rare, until suddenly they disappeared. It was only then that it became clear that it wasn't just caramel. It was a taste of a time when sweet could be bitter, and it was wonderful. Tart and Tinies. Tart and Tinies were so tiny that the first impression was deceiving. It seemed as if they were just colored beads. But once you poured them into the palm of your hand and tasted them, your tongue immediately clenched from the acid, as from an unexpected ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. These candies rattled in a cardboard box, and the sound was recognizable from dozens of steps away. Dry, crunchy, like a mini xylophone in a backpack. The colors were bright: lemon yellow, strawberry pink, lime green, orange and grape, each with a touch of craziness. They weren't sucked down, they were gnawed on, snapping their teeth as if trying to crack the very boredom of change. Sometimes a handful of Tart and Tinies was poured straight into the mouth, cocking the head as if it were fuel for the imagination. The package was open from one edge, like a vitamin tube, and it made the process almost scientific. They were passed around the rows in the classroom, surreptitiously under the desk like secret fun capsules. The most magical thing was to mix the flavors without looking. The result was an explosive, unpredictable cocktail of emotions. Sometimes the tongue was colored in several colors at once, and it was a cause for pride. Some had their own favorite proportions, 2 yellow and 1 purple, or vice versa. A little math of sweets. These candies were associated with vending machines in movie theaters, with crunching in the school library, with silly laughter in the backyard. Sometimes they spilled out into my pocket, and then my fingers found them like treasure among coins and small notes. The flavor was sour but not painful, more like a cheerful slap from a best friend. In warm weather, the candy stuck together slightly, forming strange, sticky clumps that were eaten anyway. Some kids put the boxes in a collection, on a shelf like books with pride. There were times when Tart and Tinies came to the rescue. A boring commute, waiting in line, a lingering rainstorm. Whoever had the box became the hero of the day. When parents asked to share, it was bewildering. These candies were too childish for adults. Sometimes there were competitions to see who could hold a whole handful in their mouth for the longest time without chewing it. Just the sound of a box in my backpack would lift my spirits for the whole day. Their flavor was like the tinkling of bells. Light, tinkling, with a spark. Tart and Tinies left no trace, didn't stain my hands, didn't stick to my teeth, only to my memory. They disappeared as quietly as they appeared, leaving behind a noise that can still be heard today. It wasn't just candy, it was the crunch of childhood. Dweebs. On second, Dweebs appeared as little brothers of the famous nerds. Softer, thicker, a little juicier, but with the same character. Their packaging was wider and more convenient. Inside there were 3 separate sections with different flavors, like a pocket tray for sweet alchemy. Each side could be opened individually, or you could open all 3 at once if it was a particularly bright day. The colors were neon, like markers on a blackboard. Bright pink, lime green, sky blue. The flavor hit right at the receptors. Immediate, sharp, but not overly aggressive like the nerds. The Dweebs were a little softer, more pleasant to the bite, as if they were specifically designed for a long snack. They didn't crunch to a crunch, but rather they clicked like tiny drops of sugar on your teeth. At school, the box was held directly in the palm of the hand, fingers clenched as if it were an artifact from outer space. They were sprinkled into a pocket, into a paper cup, into the mouth, all at the same time. One flavor reminded them of gum, another of fruit ice, a third of soda at a party. Some mixed the flavors right in their mouths and tried to guess what came out. A home test of flavor madness. The packaging jingled in my backpack like a tambourine, quiet but insistent. Sometimes the candy would stick together, forming little sweet comets. And it was those pieces that were the most delicious. Whoever had a pack of Dweebs was considered the rightful owner of attention for the entire recess. They were shared with friends, but reluctantly, they were too rare to give away just for fun. Some kids carefully cut open the wrapper so as not to damage it and keep it in the collection. TV commercials portrayed the candies as fun, slightly silly but kind. And they did bring a smile at first sight. Parents confused them with nerds, but that was a fundamental mistake. Dweebs were unique. In stores, they stood not on the counter, but slightly off to the side as a secret for those in the know. Sometimes they were sold by the piece and then picked out like the color of candy on a Christmas tree. On vacations, Dweebs were the first thing you put in your backpack. The trip didn't seem the same without them. Kids made up their own names for the flavors because the real ones were too boring. Meteor tangerine, space blueberry, nuclear plum. The disappearance of the Dweebs didn't cause an uproar, but it left a void, like stopping ringing bells after school. Today they seem impossible, too colorful, too delicious, too fun, like a dream that was real. But the memory of them lives on in the rustling wrappers of the past. Giggles cookies. Giggles cookies looked like someone had printed good cheer right on the cookies. These round, symmetrical biscuits weren't just sweet, they literally looked and smiled back. Each one had a different face. Some winked, some giggled, some seemed to hold a laugh inside. You could see the filling before you even took a bite. Vanilla or strawberry cream shone through the cutout eyes and mouth. The cookies themselves were crispy, with a golden crust, baking aroma, and a hint of caramel. The flavor was perfectly balanced, neither too sweet nor too plain, like a good joke told in time. They always came in pairs, like best friends, and lay flat in the box like a review. Giggles were taken to school, on a picnic, on the road. They were the universal currency of joy. Even adults couldn't resist. Give me one! And it wasn't just the cookies that brought a smile. Sometimes the cream came slightly out of the eyes, and that made the cookie even funnier. Children thought they were eating cartoon characters. The faces looked so alive. Some children gnawed carefully in a circle, leaving the face for last. There were those who dismantled the cookies into halves and licked the filling, a ritual that was not up for discussion. Sometimes there was a contest to see who could find the funniest facial expression. The package rustled soundly, and inside were even rows of cookies, like a little theater ready for a performance. For birthdays, a pack of Giggles was given as a token of special friendship. After all, they were not just sweets, but emotions. In the commercials, they jumped, sang, and laughed, and children believed that there really were funny creatures inside. Sometimes one cookie would fall out of the box and roll across the floor, leaving a trail of laughter behind it. They went into a thermos of cocoa as the perfect accompaniment, a warm drink and a warm smile. When the pack ran out, it got a little sad, like the show was over. They were in lunch boxes, sticking out of pockets, hiding under textbooks, always on time. Sometimes parents would say it was too childish, but then they'd eat a couple themselves. The disappearance of Giggles cookies was a blow to an entire generation. It wasn't just the cookies that disappeared from the shelves, but the faces they grew up with. Today, you can only find images in old catalogs and VHS commercials, but the smile of those cookies still lives on, in memory, in photos, in memories of childhood, where everything was a little tastier and a lot more fun. Fruit wrinkles. Fruit wrinkles looked like miniature dried fruit from a cartoon, colored, soft, wrinkled, as if they had just hatched from a candy bunch. These chewy pieces were slightly sticky, with a translucent surface in which tiny sugar crystals glistened. They were sold in small bags, most often with drawings of fruit with smiles, as if they were a secret fruit gang. The flavor was juicy, rich, almost explosive, but it created an image of healthy sweetness. Parents were a little more tolerant of fruit wrinkles because the commercials called them a fruit snack, even though every kid knew it was 100% candy. The colors were intense: cherry, orange, grape, and everyone had their favorite. Sometimes there were special giant pieces clumped together from several, and there was a fight for them. The bag fit comfortably in my pocket, and it was easy to take out one at a time, pulling with my fingers as if taking berries from a vine. They tugged slightly if you tried to break them with your fingers, and then sprang back like soft rubber crystals. Some children unwrapped the package until it was flat and dumped everything on the desk to sort by color. There were those who put them all in their mouths at once and chewed with their eyes closed, enjoying the chaos of flavors. Sometimes they clumped together and had to be rescued by separating them with jeweler's care. The packet would open with a nice, tight rustle, and that sound was a sign of impending pleasure. In elementary school, they were often put in the lunchbox next to the sandwich, as a well-deserved reward after a boring sandwich. Fruit wrinkles were a cross between candy, marmalade, and dried fruit, but in reality, they were a child's own personal paradise. Inside the package, they looked like colorful blobs from another planet. In the heat, they would melt and stick together, which made them even tastier, like caramelized fruit. They could be chewed quietly, no crunch or rustle, perfect for a movie or a secret treat in class. At school, they were hidden in pencil cases, shared, passed down the row, sometimes just placed in the palm of a friend's hand. Take them, but don't touch the purple ones. There were collectors who sorted wrinkles by shade, arranging the patterns on the table like a mosaic. TV ads promised an explosion of natural flavor, and for many it really was. When the package was empty, it was squeezed into a lump, sniffed and put in a pocket, as if a piece of the day could still be saved. Over time, fruit wrinkles disappeared without explanation, like magical things disappearing that are too fun to be forever. But the memory of them remains, in the tongue that remembers their texture, and in the fingers that once picked over the shriveled, but so alive fruit lumps of childhood. Kugel-flavored peanut butter. Kugel was like a morning surprise in a jar, a peanut paste that boldly went beyond tradition. It was sold in glass jars with funny eyes and a logo that looked more like a cartoon character than a product. The flavors were amazing: chocolate, cinnamon, banana, vanilla. It was as if the dessert had entered the morning routine through the front door. The lid opened with a slight pop, and underneath was a flavor that made you forget cereal, toast, and even bacon. The texture was smooth, almost glossy, stretching lazily like caramel. Spreading Kugel on toast was a separate pleasure, smooth, shiny, as if you were painting with a brush on a canvas. The banana flavor was considered especially exquisite, a combination worthy of a morning genius. Kids loved smearing it on crackers, cookies, and even dipping apples in it. Parents pretended pasta was just a regular food, but sometimes at night they would open a jar and eat it with a spoon while standing by the refrigerator. Kugel turned an ordinary sandwich into a cake. Just put the two halves together and press them down. That's a mini dessert. Sometimes the jar came with a recipe. Try it with marshmallow, and then breakfast became an experimental laboratory of flavor. You could take pasta to school in a little jar, and it was the stuff of envy. The jar had beautiful curls left in it by the spoon, as if someone had been drawing inside. Some children ate it directly from the jar, without wasting time on bread. The spoon Kugel, happiness. At picnics, it was a must. Food to take with you on any trip, even into the forest, even into space. When the can was nearing its end, it was scraped down to the walls. Too delicious to leave even a gram. Sometimes Kugel was added to milk or ice cream, creating sweet shakes that seemed a forbidden delight. On the kitchen shelf, it stood like a star, bright, cheerful, different from everything else. You could tell it apart even with your eyes closed. So distinctive was the flavor. At school lunches, kids would show off their kugel sandwiches, showing off the creamy spreads on the soft white bread. Even the smell caused an instant burst of appetite, rich, homemade, with a touch of fantasy. Sometimes kugel was hidden from younger siblings, too precious to share without reason. In commercials, the jar talked, danced, and sang, and it seemed true. It was alive. The disappearance of this pasta was a real loss, not just of flavor, but of mood. It made breakfast fun, and no peanut paste has sounded so vibrant since. Pizzeria's pizza chips. Pizzerias were like a slice of pizza turned into a crunch. No dough, no cheese, but with soul. The packaging screamed of itself, red, yellow, orange hues, blazing like a pizza oven. The chip itself was thin, almost like a pita, but dense and fried, with bubbles and a texture reminiscent of the burnt edge of a real pizza. From the first bite, the flavors exploded in my mouth. Tomato, oregano, garlic, cheese, like taking a bite of something that definitely shouldn't be a chip. Some flavors mimicked pepperoni or four cheese, and surprisingly, it really felt like it. Everyone had a favorite variation. Some loved the spiciness, while others opted for a mild cheesy note. Opening a package was accompanied by an odor that made you want to pull out a paper napkin and wait for the delivery guy. At recess, one bag would turn the school table into a miniature pizza parlor. These chips were insidiously delicious. It was impossible to eat one and stop. Their crunch was not just loud but defiant, like a shout, "I'm here and I'm tastier than you thought." My fingers smelled like real food after eating them, and that odor didn't go away for a long time. The package was torn open eagerly with hands, teeth, sometimes two of them at once. So great was the temptation. Inside were debris, crumbs, perfect triangles, and everything went into the mouth without a trace. Pizzerias were put in lunchboxes as a reward, saved for an evening in front of the TV, hidden from brothers. The commercials promised pizza you can take with you, and they weren't lying. A picnic with a bag of pizzerias felt like an Italian road trip. Sometimes they were added to other dishes, to pasta, to soup, just to enhance the flavor. When the chips ran out, there were seasoned crumbs left in the bag, and they were sprinkled directly into your mouth as if they were the seasoning of the gods. It felt like they were invented by teenagers, brash, smart, and in love with pizza. Some people collected the packages, considering them food trophies. Their taste was impossible to confuse with regular potato chips. Too complex, too rich, too theatrical. The disappearance of pizzerias was perceived as the disappearance of an entire era. Delicious, colorful, brash. They weren't just an appetizer. They were a fantasy of pizza in a world where it was always in short supply. They are remembered now as a crazy idea that worked, as a flavor that proved too bold to stay forever. Chewel's Liquid Center Gum. Chewel's was more than gum. It was a tiny gimmick, a trap for expectations. On the outside, it looked like an ordinary rectangular pad, smooth, colored, with a matte surface. But there was a liquid filling lurking inside, and no one had warned him that it would go off on the first bite. The first time it was unexpected. Crunch. And suddenly a powerful stream of sweetness burst out on the tongue, as if the candy was crushed right into the mouth. The filling was fruity, bright, a little sticky, but not cloying, with a precise hit in the flavor. Grapes, mint, cherry, watermelon. It felt like the gum decided to become a lollipop for 1 second. Chewels were sold in striped packages, and each pack looked like an invitation to a world of delicious surprise. Children shared it warily. Wait, chew carefully. You could feel the inner lake of gum with your fingers if you squeezed the pad, but not always. There were those who purposely nibbled slowly so as not to immediately hit the center. Others, on the contrary, clenched their teeth sharply for that brief explosion of flavor. Sometimes the filling would shoot out unexpectedly, on the tongue, on the palate, even on the cheek, and this caused laughter and surprise. In the heat, the gum got softer and the filling would seep over the edge, like caramel and candy. Some people tried to carefully cut Chewels with a knife to see how much liquid there was, like scientists on a sweet dissection. They were sold near the cash registers, and one packet in your hand already meant this day is going to be delicious. In the school hallways, they were sold by the piece as a privilege. If you chewed them slowly, the flavor lasted longer. But if you chewed them quickly, they left a sweet taste inside, like the liquid filling of a candy bar. At first, adults were wary of them, chewing liquid, but then they got hooked. There were flavors with a cooling effect that made your breath as fresh as a frosty morning. Some kids mixed chews with regular gum to prolong the blast and preserve the texture. When the wrapper was empty, they folded it neatly and kept it in their pocket, as a memento of the moment. In TV commercials, the gum would split open in slow motion, and the liquid inside would splash like a miniature ocean of flavor. It wasn't just refreshing, it surprised every time. The chews disappeared, leaving behind a memory of a brief but vivid moment when ordinary gum suddenly became fireworks. It was the taste of surprise, and it stayed with me forever as a child. Fun fruits. Fun fruits were not just a candy, but an entire fruit zoo in a bag. These small, soft, chewy candies looked like animals, leaves, berries, and flowers. So adorable that you wanted to look at them longer than eat them. Each piece was like a figurine made of plasticine, smooth, brightly colored, with fine details as if handmade. The colors were rich, saturated like a summer afternoon. Cherry, raspberry, pineapple, lime, grape. Each flavor had its own character. Sweet, sour, tart, and children quickly found their favorites. The packaging was small, rustling, with cartoon characters who smiled from the showcase, inviting to play. Opening the package, one could immediately smell the fruity aroma. Not chemical, but warm, like from a jam jar. The candies were not just chewed, they bounced on the tongue, elastic like real berries. Some children arranged the figures on the table and acted out whole scenes. The bear eats an orange, then goes to the cherry. There was always an element of surprise inside the bag. I never knew which shapes would be more. Sometimes there were rare shapes, a dolphin, a panda, or even a tree, and that was considered good luck. Fun fruits were often given in the lunchbox as the fun part of lunch, and without them, the sandwich seemed dull. These candies were soft, but not cloying. They felt textured like natural fruit. The kids shared, swapped, argued over whose flavor was better, who found more grapes. Sometimes the candies stuck to the wrapper and had to be carefully separated like jewelry. They were added to cereal, ice cream, even yogurt, making breakfast colorful. Some children ate them all at once, others stretched the pleasure by storing the bag until the evening. On the road, fun fruits were the perfect snack. They didn't melt, they didn't get their hands dirty, and they delighted every time. You could fumble for a couple in your jacket pocket, like a little secret left over from the morning. Sometimes the bags were decorated with figures cut out of cardboard, and they were collected as a collection. They were the first to disappear in the stores, and if someone managed to buy the last packet, it was considered almost a feat. At the holidays, fun fruits were poured into bowls and children would dig around happily picking out their favorites. They were like a tiny garden in which every leaf could be eaten. Their flavor was associated with joy for no reason, just because. And even now, hearing the rustle of a small package, somewhere inside echoes the voice of childhood, full of palms, smiles, and soft fruit animals. Hershey's Swoops. Hershey's Swoops were not just a candy, but almost a design experiment in the world of sweets. Their shape exactly mirrored the curve of a chip, a thin, graceful, slightly curved petal, as if the chocolate had been poured into a Pringles press silhouette. Each package contained even rows of these chocolate feathers, neatly stacked on top of each other, like gorgeous miniature sculptures. The surface of the petals glistened as if polished, and that sheen made them look like something from a boutique. The flavors were familiar: milk chocolate, almond, peanut butter, but the shape transformed them into something new. Opening a box of Swoops was like opening a jewelry case. Even adults looked at them with respect. Finally, chocolate with manners. The packaging opened effortlessly, but each layer seemed almost fragile. One petal melted on the tongue in seconds, but it left a long, soft chocolate trail. They were pleasant to hold in the hand, thin, cool, with a slight vibration when touched. Some kids carefully ate them one at a time, careful not to break the curve. Others crumbled them and added them to ice cream or cereal. They seemed too elegant for a school lunch, but that's what made them especially desirable. Swoops were often bought for a special occasion, for a picnic, a trip, an evening watching VHS. When one petal broke, it was almost tragic. The aesthetics were compromised. Sometimes they were taken on a date. It was a sweetness that said, I think about taste and style. They didn't get your hands dirty, didn't leave crumbs. Perfect for the theater, the library, a secret snack. In commercials, the chocolate fell in slow motion, curving like silk. Swoops were often kept separately, in a desk drawer next to postcards and bookmarks. There were children who collected the wrappers and cut smooth figures out of them. In the heat, the petals melted, losing their shape, and it broke hearts. But in the freezer, they would turn into chocohurst, cold, clean, tinkling. It was an attempt to elevate the candy on a pedestal, and it succeeded. When Swoops disappeared, it wasn't just chocolate that was gone. It was a sweet gesture with character. To this day, they remain an example of how sweetness can be not only delicious, but also beautiful. Peanut butter boppers. Peanut butter boppers look like mini happiness bombs. Dense, roundish balls dipped in chocolate and sprinkled with crunchy nuts. They were sold in convenient tubes like candy bars, but inside there were ball-shaped portions, an unexpected format that immediately distinguished boppers from other sweets. From the first bite, the filling began to stick to the palate, a thick, sticky peanut mass that enveloped the tongue like a thick blanket of flavor. Soft chocolate on the outside and a crunchy contrast of chopped nuts and wafer crumbs around the edges. The packaging was tight, a little stiff, and when opened made a short pop sound, as if releasing a genie of flavor. These candies were considered a snack. One bopper could replace half a lunch. They were taken with them to school, to trainings on bicycles, in a pocket or backpack, always at hand. The flavor was rich, addictive, but not cloying, the perfect combination of sweetness and nutty saltiness. Boppers were a favorite snack before an exam, gave energy and a feeling that the day could be conquered. Some ate them slowly, picking them apart layer by layer, like archaeologists of sweetness. Others ate them in one bite, enjoying the instant rush of satiety and pleasure. When the last ball was left in the package, there was a moment of dilemma, to eat at once or to save for later, which was almost never possible. Boppers were perfect for sharing. One ball for a friend, one for yourself. And the friendship was strengthened. Sometimes parents would put them in a lunchbox and it was considered a special gift. Today is a good day. In the commercials, the bopper rolled across the walnut landscape like a flavor comet. They were cut into bite-sized pieces and put in ice cream, making an impromptu dessert worthy of a storefront. Some people tried to recreate them at home, rolling them in peanut paste and dipping them in sprinkles. But it wasn't the same. An evening bopper with a cup of cocoa was like a point in a sentence. Fatty, sweet, perfect. Sometimes they were slightly melted in the backpack, and then you had to open them carefully. But that only made the flavor stronger. Even an empty packet smelled so good that it wasn't thrown away right away. The disappearance of peanut butter boppers left the world feeling as if it had lost something small but important, like forgetting a favorite habit. They are remembered as the perfect balance: nutritious, fun, delicious, no fuss. It was a candy that didn't just please, it sustained, and that's what makes it irreplaceable. Fizzy's drink tablets. Fizzies weren't just candy, they were a chemical marvel in the world of children's entertainment. They were round tablets that looked like ascorbic acid, but each one carried the magic of transformation. When you dropped one into a glass of water, it would start hissing, loud, cheerful, like bubbles talking. The water began to froth like a witch's brew, and eyes widened with delight. Colors appeared gradually, from clear to bright, pink, yellow, blue, depending on the taste. It was a real show in a glass, not just a drink. The flavors mimicked soda, cola, grape, orange, lemonade, and for a kid, it was the homemade equivalent of real soda. Fizzies smelled like a holiday, spicy, fruity, sparkling. Some purposely lowered the tablet slowly, as if dropping an anchor into a sea of flavor. Within the effervescence was the sound of the future drink. It was as if it was coming to life, bubbling and preparing to meet. The very moment of dissolution was more important than the taste. It was science, play, and food in one. Children organized contests, whose pill would sizzle longer or stronger. Sometimes ice or lemon was added to the water. Creating a restaurant version, those who had fizzies became temporary bartenders in the kitchen, serving their friends' author's lemonade. The pill could be broken in half to make a weak version, or conversely, tossed two at once for a super gassy effect. Some people tried to eat it dry, but that was a feat accompanied by a violent, foamy explosion in the mouth. At school, such experiments were legendary. The packaging was dense, with cells like vitamins, and tearing off each pill felt good, as if you were releasing power. Fizzies were taken on the road to avoid drinking boring water. Sometimes, if there was no glass at home, they dissolved them directly in the bottle and kept the lid on so that it wouldn't fly away. In the commercials, the drink splashed in the glass like an adult evening soda, only brighter. It was the only sweet treat that involved water, and that made it seem more important. Even just watching the fizz was enjoyable, like hypnosis. As the pill disappeared and the water began to froth to the brim, there was a sense of, I did it myself inside. The flavor wasn't always consistent, but the emotion was always vivid. The disappearance of fizzies left behind a sense of understatement, like some magic trick was gone from the kitchen forever. Because fizzies were more than a drink. They were a small storm of flavor in the glass of an ordinary day. Bub's Daddy Bubblegum. Bub's Daddy looked not like gum, but like a brick wrapped in a rainbow. A long, thick, almost square stick in a brightly colored wrapper with a bold logo, it was an instant eye-catcher in the display case. Its length was astonishing. Enough gum for a week, or for the whole class if you shared. One piece could be cut into 5, and each would still be larger than regular gum. The wrapper was slippery and slightly tight, as if even the packaging hinted, get ready. Colors ranged from neon pink to toxic yellow, with flavors that sounded like promise. Grape, tutti frutti, green apple. From the first bite, Bub's Daddy wouldn't budge. It had to be chewed, tame like a wild animal. But after a few chewing efforts, the pastille became soft, elastic, obedient. The flavor was rich and bright, and, as it often happened in the 80s, it lasted. Not for long. But that moment, the first 30 seconds, was like an explosion of candy fireworks. Then there was a nice, warm flavor that didn't lose its value. Kids liked to pull the gum like a rubber band to measure how much it would stretch before it burst. Some kept a stick of Bub's Daddy in their backpacks and carefully broke off an inch at a time, like chocolate. They traded it in classrooms, trading pieces for stickers or tokens. Parents grumbled that it's not gum, it's plasticine, but then took a bite of the little piece themselves. In the heat, it softened slightly and stuck to the inside of the wrapper. But that only added to the real gum feeling. It was perfect for giant bubbles, the kind that burst with a pop and left a sweet imprint on your nose. There was something heroic about popping an entire stick in your mouth and trying to pull it off. The packaging rattled if you threw it in your bag. Freedom rang inside. The kiosks sold it near the cash register, next to magazines and marmalade, and no one walked past. Some kids wrapped the leftovers in a piece of paper and hid them in a pencil case, for later. It smelled so bright that the teachers noticed, even from across the classroom. Bub's Daddy wasn't just chewed, it was displayed, worn, made part of the repertoire. When the gum ran out, the wrapper was kept for a long time, like a memory of something big. Because Bub's Daddy wasn't just gum, it was a legend. Heavy, long, bright, and honest, like the 80s themselves. Sugar Mama Caramel Pop. Sugar Mama was heavy, so heavy that putting it in a lunchbox made it sound different. This candy felt like a weighty promise of sweetness in my hand. Dense, hard, encased in smooth chocolate armor. Inside was a thick caramel, viscous and elastic, like a thread pulled by time. It had to be eaten slowly. Otherwise, the teeth were at risk. From the first bite, the teeth were stuck, and the caramel seemed to stretch back in time, through memories. The wrapper was scarlet with gold letters, sparkling like a silk ribbon on a holiday box. The stick, white, short, with a slight curve, was held firmly, though sometimes tired from the sweet heaviness. The candy was often put in the freezer to make it even harder and stretch the pleasure. In the heat, the chocolate melted slightly, sticking to the fingers, but this did not embarrass anyone. On the contrary, it seemed that it should be so. Unwrapping sugar, Mama, was a separate ritual, carefully from both ends, so as not to break the structure. Sometimes the caramel would start to leak around the edges, a sign you'd waited too long. The chocolate shell cracked with a slight crunch, exposing the lingering heart. It slowly melted in your mouth, leaving behind a trail of creamy sweetness and deep satiety. Sugar Mama was not a fun candy. It was adult, serious, almost solemn. It was eaten respectfully, without fuss, like a dessert in a theater. Some bit off a millimeter at a time, savoring it like a jewel. Others, unable to bear it, bit into both sides, squeezing the caramel outward like a volcano. After one lollipop, I wanted to lie down and be quiet for a while. It was so nourishing. The candy was given as a gift, brought to a holiday, saved until the evening. It left a warm trace in the pocket, a piece of sweet time. Parents remembered it from childhood, and now they gave it to their children, as if they were sharing a secret. In stores, it was on separate shelves, as if it didn't want to stand next to ordinary candy. In the school cafeteria, if someone reached for a Sugar Mama, conversations were silenced for a moment. It was a candy that required pause. Its disappearance from the shelves felt like the loss of something stable. Because Sugar Mama was more than just a candy. It was an anchor of flavor, slow, rich, honest. The very caramel soul of the 80s lived in it. Choward's Violet Mints. Choward's Violet Mints were like perfume turned into candy. At first glance, the packaging seemed antique. Heavy patterned paper, the color of dark lavender, as if it came out of my grandmother's box. Opening it, you could smell a scent like old powder, handmade soap, and a garden at dusk. Each candy bar was flat, square, and delicately purple, like a marshmallow from another time. The flavor wasn't just unusual, it was strange, mysterious, like a dream in which everything seems familiar but elusive. It wasn't menthol or fruit or flower. It was a violet chord, like from turn-of-the-century French candies. The first sensation was confusing, sweet but not quite, cool but not minty. The kids argued, "It tastes like Grandma's hat." And there was something fair about that. But those who fell in love with this candy could never forget it. The packaging rustled quietly, almost respectfully. The candies lay neatly in rows like soldiers ready for a mysterious mission of flavor. They didn't stick, didn't crumble, melted slowly, leaving the flavor of old perfume and inky drafts on the tongue. Parents ate them as if they were remembering their youth, and a half-forgotten smile appeared on their faces. Sometimes the candy was put in a coat pocket. It warmed up slightly and began to smell like a fragrant sachet. In the school locker room, they were hidden in a pencil case like a secret artifact. Some used them as adult candy when they wanted to appear more serious and mysterious. Girls imitated their mothers by spreading them out in the palm of their hands like pills from a romantic movie in the 50s. In medicine cabinets, they looked like something therapeutic, although in fact they only cured the longing for something beautiful. Sometimes you put a candy on your tongue and closed your eyes, to live for half a minute in a world of violets, rain, and letters with sealing wax. The flavor was hard to describe in words, and that's what made it magical. Some kids would spit out the first one, but years later they would say, "I didn't get it then." They smelled like a closet of vintage clothes, a theater dressing room, a flowery window in the attic. They were rare in vending machines, and whoever found one kept the wrapper like a postcard from the past. The disappearance of these candies has left a vacuum in the flavor space. There's nothing else like it. Choward's Violet Mints weren't about sweetness. They were about atmosphere, about the smell of memory, about a flavor that refused to be understood, and therefore became eternal. Wacky wafers. Wacky wafers looked like alien tokens. Big, perfectly round, flat and colored, as if made not of sugar, but of sweet pottery. They lay stacked in the wrapping, like miniature vinyl records, each with a different flavor. The wrapper was thin, matte, with brightly colored lettering and silly fruit faces, like an invitation to a world where everything was a little ridiculous, but a lot of fun. Opening the package meant pouring a spectrum of color into the palm of my hand. Strawberry pink, grape purple, watermelon green, banana yellow, apple and lime. They were smooth, cool to the touch with a light powder on the surface, as if covered in moon pollen. The first bite was accompanied by a dry crunch, as if a porcelain toy was breaking apart. The flavor was bright, concentrated, without halftones, as direct as a ray of sunlight. They could be chewed or held on the tongue, letting them dissolve slowly like candy. Some children arranged them by color, made stacks, built towers, and candy Jenga tiles. Sometimes one wafer would accidentally split open in the package, and then the debris was eaten first, like good luck crumbs. Inside the school backpack, they rattled like coins, and that was a happy sound. They were perfect for an exchange. One strawberry for 2 bananas, the bargain of the century. My parents wrinkled their nose at the brightness, but furtively asked to try at least a piece. They didn't melt in the heat. They didn't break in the cold. They were as resilient as childhood itself. Some took them at recess and ate them one at a time, stretching them over the whole day. They were hidden in their pockets as a sweet reserve that could be pulled out at a particularly boring moment. Sometimes the waffles were used in board games, chips, tokens, prizes. They were too weird to become mainstream, but that's what made them special. Even just holding them in your hand felt good. A fragile, brightly colored plane, like a toy from another country. The flavors were a bit artificial, slightly chemically, but that was the beauty of it. It was the taste of pure, sweet play. When the package ran out, the wrapper was folded up neatly, like a scroll. The disappearance of wacky wafers went quietly, but the emptiness remained loud. Because they were more than candy. They were a child's geometry of taste, a crunch of color, an edible laugh. Powerhouse Bar. The Powerhouse Bar wasn't just a bar. It was a real challenge. Heavy, dense, with a massive filling, it lay in your hand like a brick of sweet energy. The packaging shone with a metallic sheen, as if to warn, careful, this is not a toy. From the first bite, the full force of the name was felt. The thick caramel stretched like cheese in a pizza, and the nuts crunched so loudly that it was heard at the next table. Inside was everything: caramel, nougat, crushed peanuts, soft chocolate, all pressed into a dense slab, like eating layered lava. It wasn't chewed, it was wrestled with. Sometimes you had to pause. It was so rich. After half a bar, someone would put it away for later. But then they'd come back anyway. The flavor was warm, like an autumn oven, and did not let go for a long time, leaving a nutty aftertaste. It was taken on picnics, camping trips, competitions. It was a survival bar. Parents bought it for energy, but ate half of it in the car. It suited those who said, I want something specific, no airs and graces. Powerhouse was in the bag like a stockpile, not for pleasure, but for when you really want it. It was split in half, the wrapper unwrapped slowly, like a trophy package. Sometimes the nougat inside melted a little, and it became even more stretchy, almost hot. It smelled like caramel and chocolate, but with a nutty austerity. Not as a dessert, but as a snack with serious intentions. It was a favorite at sporting events. It didn't melt, crumble, or disappear instantly. It was sometimes substituted for lunch, and no one complained. It didn't need advertising with clowns and slogans. It spoke for itself. He was respected because he was hearty, honest, and without ponces. In his backpack, he rattled deafeningly but promisingly. Some kids cut it with a knife, like a cake, because eating the whole thing was a feat. After Powerhouse, I didn't want any more sweets. I just wanted to lie on the grass and look up at the sky. Its disappearance left a strange feeling, as if the last bridge between dessert and food had been removed. Because Powerhouse wasn't just delicious, it was substantial. It was an anchor among the light, airy bars, and it truly lived up to its name. Pink Panther Flakes cereal. Pink Panther Flakes in candy bar format were like a box of morning cartoons turned into candy. On the outside was a bright, evocative pink wrapper with a smiling pink panther, as if inviting you to eat a piece of pink magic. The candy bar was covered in pink icing, glossy and smooth, like nail polish from a doll set. Inside, compressed flakes molded together with sweet syrup to form a dense, crunchy bar. Each bite was accompanied by a loud crunch, like the crunch of first steps on fresh snow. The flavor was sweet, vanilla and strawberry, with a slight berry sourness, like a child's dream of marshmallow ice cream. It smelled like sugar, watermelon bubblegum, and some kind of cartoon nostalgia. Just looking at the candy bar made me want to smile. It was like a toy you could eat. It was often put in the lunchbox next to the apple and sandwich, but everyone knew it was the star of the box. At school, desk mates would lean over the wrapper. Is that real? Sometimes the candy bar would thaw slightly in my backpack and get softer, and then the flavor was even more intense. Some people bit off the edge so as not to spoil the perfect geometry. Inside, you could see whole flakes, as if frozen in pink lava. The packaging wasn't thrown away. It was collected, glued to diaries, bookmarked. It wasn't just a snack. It was an event, a celebration between breaks. It was taken on a hike, on an excursion, at a rehearsal, as a secret reserve of good mood. In the store, the bar stood on the shelf among the usual granola, but stood out like a pink flamingo in a flock of pigeons. Kids made up that it gave cartoon energy. You eat it and you get funnier, like Pink Panther himself. Some would carefully eat the entire pink coating, leaving the cereal for later. When it was finished, their fingers were still sticky for a long time, and they wanted to lick even the wrapper. It was a candy bar that said, "You earned it." It wasn't taken every day, only on special occasions. The disappearance of the Pink Panther Flakes bar felt like a favorite character was taken off the screens. Because he was more than a sweet. He was a part of the animated world that you could take with you and eat, with crunch, laughter, and the flavor of a dream. Zots looked like ordinary candy, a round, smooth candy in a rustling wrapper with a name that sounded like an incantation. No one suspected that inside lurked a veritable volcano of flavor. On the outside was a hard shell, sweet and slightly sour, with the flavor of a familiar fruit candy. But inside hid a sizzling filling that came to life once you got to the center. It didn't just bubble, it exploded, foaming and bursting out, as if a miniature soda revolution had suddenly started in your mouth. The first experience was a shock. The candy hissed like soda and tickled my tongue to the point of tears and laughter. Some kids were frightened, others instantly fell in love with this chemical magic. Zots weren't just eaten, they were waited for, stretching the pleasure to get to that very climax. The wrappers were brightly colored, with lightning bolts, zigzags, and hints that it's not just candy. The Zots flavor was intense: cherry, apple, grape, watermelon, the classics enhanced by the surprise effect. Inside the candy, dry powder, which began to react with saliva and literally whistled in the mouth. Children were warned, don't bite before you're ready, and they believed it, because the first bites were often accompanied by a fountain of bubbles. The candy was held to the side of the tongue to regulate the flow of fizz, like a valve. In class, Zots were chewed surreptitiously, trying not to give themselves away with strange sounds and grimaces. Sometimes 2 or 3 were eaten at once, and then the sensation was like fireworks from the mouth. There were those who just sucked the shell and spit out the filling, so as not to cope with the reaction. But the real heroes waited for the full explosion. The sound of Zots in your mouth was recognizable, a muffled hissing, as if you had become a small steam engine. They were discussed, compared. The green one fizzes harder, and the red one lasts longer. At the store, they bought them in packs because one wasn't enough. The wrappers were kept, made into chains or wrapping books. They were a kind of authorized explosion, legal craziness to take to school. When a Zots was finished, it left a sour residue on the tongue and a sense that something big had happened. Even adults, after trying it once, couldn't forget that acid attack. The disappearance of Zots from the shelves felt like the end of an era of small discoveries. Because they weren't just a candy, they were an adventure. Crunchy, sizzling, cheeky, like a laugh at the wrong moment. Here's an emotional, nostalgic introduction and conclusion for a video or article about forgotten 80s candy. The style is imaginative, warm, and immersive. Perfect for YouTube, TikTok, Reels, a blog, or podcast. Each candy on this list is like an old photo without a caption, but with an emotion. A crispy waffle that made the classroom go silent. A candy that made your tongue sting, but you wanted more. Powdered pills that smelled like violets in childhood. These things are not just gone, they are gone along with the era, where joy was measured not by likes, but by grams of sugar and the ringing of wrappers in the pocket. But when we remember them, it's as if we become part of that simple but bright world again. A world where a candy bar could be a superpower, and a candy bar could be the envy of the whole school. If you want to keep that taste of memory alive and learn more about the things that made our childhood magical, subscribe to the channel. Here we open the doors to where everything was real, where sweet was crunchy, sour was fun, and every sounded louder than words.